Hey, today's subject is modularity. And what is modularity good for? It's a way to build a bookshelf like the one behind me, which has a certain height, and then you will fit about 99% of the books in it. Some stick out, and we accept that they are put in a different direction. But this is a way to accommodate all these books without creating a separate element for each book, which wouldn't make sense. We want flexibility to change the books in place, and we want this to fit for as many books as possible. So the basic idea is rather clear. I'm trying to coordinate all these elements that are available on the building market, go to a fair to take a look at them. It's infinite, a lot of elements, and to coordinate them by modular approach. But unfortunately, then you have the question of standardization, and if old standards are replaced by new standards. So as the buildings last for a very long time, the standards that you establish should be long-lasting. So in Germany in the 60s and 70s, there have been two standards. The problem. One was by ISO, International Standardization Organization, and they didn't take into account the German modular system. So the ISO system is 1M, which is 10 centimeters, and then they have 3M, then they have 12M as preferential measures, and then they have, for example, 36 and 72. And so that's a system which is based on 10 centimeters. But to say I'm having a system which is based on 10 centimeters is not sufficient, because if I'm drawing a grid of, let's say, 12M, so that's 1.20 meters, then I would have to place the construction elements on this grid. So there are two methods to do so. One is the line grid, and I would put, for example, separating walls in the middle of these lines. And the other possibility would be a band grid. Band grid means that I'm putting my elements here. So the band grid has the disadvantage that I have to use a special connector here to link the normal elements, which would then have 11M, and this would be 1M, so 10 centimeters for the wall thickness and 1.10 meters for the element. And here, as you will notice, I might have different element sizes, because one time I'm hitting the line with my element, and here I'm stopping 5 centimeters away from the line. So in this case here I'm getting elements of different size, which makes life hard. And in this case here I'm getting more elements. So as you can see, the modular coordination is not something that is easy, and well, to get to the conclusion right away, in my opinion, it's not really necessary. But this was the idea of industrialized building in the 60s and 70s. Now if I want to apply one of these systems, I can do so on the same grid as the load-bearing structure, here drawn in blue. So that would create even further special elements where my interior grid meets the structure. So yellow is the standard element and red is the special element, and then between the standard element and the column I would have another special size. The grid projects to the facade where we would need vertical mullions where the possible walls would meet the facade. And to avoid this, I could put the load-bearing structure on a separate grid, thus having completely independent grids for interior walls, non-load-bearing, and for the load-bearing structure. But the disadvantage is that this takes more space than the first possibility did. I could use a band grid as well, and then I could use the band grid, and the displacement of the structure which would be in terms of industrial prefabrication the most advanced solution, but with certain practical disadvantages. So the other system that I have been talking about was established by the German architect and professor Ernst Neufert. Ernst Neufert has been writing a book that most of you will know about sizes and conventions in building. And in the Third Reich, he has been working on the reconstruction of the German cities. And his idea for the reconstruction of the German cities was to modularize bricks. So he developed a certain brick format, and the modularity approach is called octameter module. So, it's based on the idea that you would divide a meter by 8, which gives you 12.5 centimeters, and the double of that is 25 centimeters. So 25 is more convenient to explain this than 12.5, because the brick, which is in front of mine, is not really 12.5 large, it's 11.5. I will explain to you why this is so. What you would have to take into account as well is the mortar joint. So as you can see, these bricks have small recesses, and these recesses are there to give better adherence to mortar and to stucco. And if you take into account a mortar joint of 1 centimeter, then your line here is maybe at 25, but the size of the brick that fits in these lines together with the mortar joints is 11.5 by 24. So 24, once again, can be divided in 2 times 11.5 and 1 mortar joint over centimeter. So the basic idea is to have standard brick size. And as you see, I'm capable of finding the exact size of this brick because I know that the grid is 25 by 25. This thing fits in this direction and in this direction, so it has to be 24 because there will be a mortar joint next to it on either side. Then I take half of the mortar joint, so that's the brick size. And then if you build with bricks, you want to create a bond, and to create the bond you need smaller size bricks. So what they did is to divide it in this direction, so you get half bricks. Then you divide it in this direction, so you get half bricks but longitudinal bricks, and then you have 1/4 and 3/4 bricks. And you can see beside me why we need these bricks to create a bond. And the bond also means that the mortar joints will intersect, if I look on the wall from above, intersect only in points and not in lines. So there cannot be a mortar joint above another mortar joint, but they always have to cross each other. That's necessary. And then you have a certain overlap, but that's maybe a minor condition. So you have these different brick sizes and no overlapping of the joints. Those are the basic conditions. So as you see, this modular approach here is different than the ISO approach. So you have two different systems on the market. You will ask yourself why Neufert did this. Well, the idea was that all German brick manufacturers could produce to the same standard, and not only the brick manufacturers, but also the window manufacturers that produce windows that fit in this hole in a brick wall. By the way, the hole, as you will have noticed, will be x times 25 plus 1 centimeter for 2 half joints on either side. Huh? But you also have to be able to fit the window in, so it might actually be smaller. But well, this only to explain to you that you have a modular system, and the window manufacturers could actually produce windows in advance, and those would fit in the walls where certain standardized holes have been created. And this was very useful in reconstruction after Second World War, where there were many refugees from the eastern parts of Germany that then belonged to Poland or Russia. And so housing had to be created for all these people. And standardized methods were rather successful in this period. But in terms of standardization, you had two standards that were competing against each other. And I have to say, nowadays, neither one of those is valid anymore. Brick system, because the mortar joints have been becoming much smaller due to energetic considerations, and ISO because it's simply not really necessary. So here I'm in our materials collection, and you can see that there are different bricks behind me. So the one that I showed you here, we have a thin format, so they add up, and at 25 centimeters a wall out of the thin format brick and the normal format bricks would meet. So that's 25 centimeters. But I can also buy that are already 25 centimeters high here. So this is 25 centimeters high, and you can see why it's a problem nowadays, because the mortar joint has been replaced by this meandering thing that is very thin. So it's not 1 centimeter anymore, but it's more. And you have different products on the market, like for example clay bricks here, that are also available in the same modular system as the standard size bricks. And for the brick system, you have lentils as well. Strong men, not anymore. But we have interior wall systems as well. So all of this is inside the same system for roller shutter. So modular coordination makes sense in certain limits, but it gets replaced by other systems of modular coordination nowadays. So in the shelf besides me, I have different types of window profiles that are available on the market. And the question that one could ask oneself is whether it makes sense to prefabricate window elements up to certain standard measures, or if it makes more sense to take these profiles that will be always the same, and then you can cut them in the dimension that you want them, order a glass as an infill, and with standardized profiles you can have much more variety in terms of dimensional coordination than either with the ISO module, ISO module, or with the brick module of Mr. Neufert you would have.